You know, I'm sorry that we are meeting under these circumstances, and yet this is, in a nutshell, the Jewish response to all things difficult, which is, and this is really important. So if you're going to write anything down, please begin this with this, okay? Resilience is not overcoming. Resilience is becoming. Resilience is not overcoming, it's becoming. It's the understanding, the acceptance, the bone deep knowledge that our human frailty, our sense of uncertainty, our lack of control is unique to us because we are not God. And even if you struggle with God as an entity, as a concept, as a context, sometimes it is sufficient to recognize that even when we don't understand that principle, at least we know we are not God. And I wanted to speak about this a little bit because I think that most healthy, sane people are incredibly relieved to hear that piece of wisdom. They're incredibly relieved to understand that when we understand that we can never understand everything there is to understand, only then do we understand. I will repeat, this is a good one for your kids. When you understand that you will never understand everything there is to understand, then you understand. And so as Jews, we recognize and we see through our own sources that this world was not created for absolute clarity. In fact, let's turn right to the very beginning of the Torah in Genesis, and it begins, in the beginning of God's creating the heavens and earth, when the earth was astonishingly empty, with darkness upon the surface of the deep, and the divine presence hovered upon the surface of the waters, God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. God saw that the light was good, and God separated between the light and the darkness. What is this telling us in its meta message? It's telling us that inherent in the human condition, my friends, is that first there is darkness and there is chaos and confusion and anxiety and fear, and then there is clarity and light. And darkness was not just the absence of light. Darkness was created just like light was created. What is the soothing component of this? Well, for me, as a person who has spent my entire life struggling with anxiety in the form of obsessive compulsive disorder, there have been moments in my heart and in my head where I think at the root, my deepest concerns and my fears manifested as neurotic anxiety, largely because, and also with the help of medication, because I couldn't control things. So the first jagged little pill we Jews have to swallow is that we are not God. We cannot control everything. And that even despite our best efforts, there will be darkness and there will be light. So I think back to a time in my life where I lived with an alcoholic person, and I used to go to AA meetings. And that began the beginning of my 12-step process, which helped me immensely. There was a prayer. Now, it is part of the Protestant liturgy, but all of the Jewish AA meetings and all of the 12-step meetings use it regardless. It's powerful. And this is called the Serenity Prayer. It goes like this. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. What is knowing the difference? Knowing the difference is the humility of understanding that you don't need to know why. That's not the question. You need to know for what. I saw this manifest in a time of crisis and read a great deal about it in the last little while. And in fact, I want to attribute it to the rabbi who actually was the one who made the dictate for this. It was during the Warsaw Ghetto, when we were not just quarantined, we were quarantined 4 families to a small room with no food and no provisions and no internet learning and no ability to comfort ourselves. And Rabbi Yitzchak Nissenbaum from the Warsaw Ghetto said the following: in the past, our enemies demanded our soul, and the Jew sanctified and sacrificed his body by sanctifying God's name. In other words, we who died did it in the sanctification of the name of God as Jews. But then he says, now the enemy demands the body of the Jew. That makes it imperative for the Jew to defend it and protect it. Be Kiddush HaChaim, a sanctifier of life. That is why it is imperative that we move away from the concern for ourselves, because the majority of us in the age group and health dynamic we're in are not going to be profoundly affected. But you know who are? Those who are vulnerable. And if there was ever a Jewish response to struggle and suffering, it is to protect the vulnerable in our societies. The elderly, from a Jewish perspective, are not left out to pasture. They are considered our greatest. We stand on their shoulders, which means that all of this quarantining, all of this social distancing is not necessarily for the benefit of us, it's for the benefit of others. And that, my friends, is the Jewish response to everything, is that we look outside of our own dynamic of anxiety and pain and look at what we can do for others. It's interesting, in those same 12-step programs, the very first step is I am powerless over, pick your poison, alcohol, sex addiction, drugs. My life has become unmanageable. The very first step in coming to serenity is to recognize that things can be unmanageable, that you can't manage this. And the second step was to turn your will over to the power of a God, how you understand that God. Why is this so significant? Even for those among us who worry about how they perceive the concept of God, if the only thing you do over this next period of these unique times is remember that you're not God, that you're not in control of anything, with the exception of how you react in the face of what's going on, it offers a psychic relief that helps diminish anxiety, not just in you, but also in your children, because our kids do not respond to what we say necessarily. Heaven knows, anyone who's raised teens knows that. What they respond to is the energetic, emotional system that's moving off us. If you are overly anxious, it wouldn't matter what you said. They feel the anxiety. In systems therapy, they explain it like this. They say, if a person comes from a family where things were not even, and you have a sense that when I have a family, I'm going to make sure that everything is divided evenly. The children do not worry so much about the size of the piece of cake that you're cutting for them. Rather, they feel your anxiety as you cut the cake, because you are so concerned and so busy worrying about things being equal, being able to control that quirk of your past, that they feel your anxiety anyway. And this is where the principle of Munna comes in. What is Munna? Often, Munna is translated as faith, but in fact, Munna actually means faithfulness. Why? Well, because Munna is a muscle that is only exercised in times of confusion and doubt. It means that I am faithful to my operating system of the kind of human being I am, that I continue on the path in the way that I have decided I operate in this world, even when I don't see the outcome. Now, this is true when you look at the word for truth in Hebrew, you get the first, the middle, and the last letter of the alphabet, Aleph, Mem, Taf, Emet. Whereas the word emunah is Aleph, Mem, Nun. You have the first letter, you know where you came from. You have the middle letter, you know where you are now. And Nun, it's just one letter beyond Mem. You don't get to know how it turns out like with truth. Rather, you know where you've been, you know where you are, and you know You're not sure beyond tomorrow where this is going to be. And if there has been ever a time for a Munna in our culture, it's today, where everything we're hearing can change on a dime, where everything is subject to new calculations within an hour, sometimes within 10 minutes. And one of the things it does is it reminds us of our inherent powerlessness over anything except our choice of reaction. In the Warsaw Ghetto, when we were told to sanctify life, our living conditions were far worse than we're experiencing now. Lori posted something yesterday. She said, your grandparents were called to war. You're called to sit on your couch. You can do this. And yes, everything is relative to the times we are in. However, as we move through this time of uncertainty, we must understand as Jews what it means to be what this Rabbi Nissenbaum asked us to be, Kiddush HaChaim, sanctifiers of life. In the Warsaw Ghetto, we had culture clubs, piano recitals. We had exquisite yeshivot and schools. Things continued. There were free loan societies and soup kitchens. People had so little, but they made sure they shared it. This is sanctification of life. This is what it means right now. What are you going to do? What you're going to do is you're going to search what you can do for others. You have no idea how much comfort it will give you and your families to do for others as opposed to thinking for yourself. So let me give you a little piece of wisdom. There is a term in Proverbs, which was written by King Solomon, and it says the following: anxiety in the heart of a person causes dejection, but a good word will turn it into joy. So first we have to examine, as we always do when we learn Hebrew texts, the word dejection. The word dejection, yashkana, actually can mean three things: to suppress, to ignore, to articulate. Well, there is, of course, an argument for suppression. Sometimes we just must push away the thoughts that come into our head that cause us grief. And there's an argument for ignoring, because when we are powerless and there's nothing we can do except determine how we're going to behave, so we ignore. But what I'm interested in today is the idea of to articulate. So it's an interesting thing. Freudian talk therapy really kind of maximized this, the idea that you speak out your worries and anxieties, which means you don't tell your children, don't worry about it. It's nothing. Allow them to speak out their angst and explain to them that the human being is meant to shine their greatest, even and especially in the midst of their nervousness. So that's why we learn. Find yourself a friend. Make yourself a teacher. That your children can and should be able to come to you as a sense of working out and articulating, yashchena, articulate what it is that they are feeling. So that's number one. Number two, and you will have a source sheet for this. I'm not sure whether it's come out yet, but you will get it. In Perkei Avot, the ethics of our fathers, in Avot 4:19, it says, it is not in our powers to explain either the well-being of the wicked or the suffering of the righteous. This is the fundamental answer to why do bad things happen to good people? What's the answer? We don't know. And anyone who claims to know, well, they suffer the same fate as the second example. In the book of Job, and we use that as a metaphor even in regular culture to, have a life like Job. Job was this incredible man, a righteous, pious man whose life was overwhelmed with tragedy. And his life and his friends assumed he must have sinned. Somehow he must have been a bad person. Ultimately, God speaks to Job from a whirlwind, and he rejects the responses of Job's friend. Here's what he says. He says, righteous people can suffer. This appeals to us in the mystery of the universe. Why? because it's not for us to know why. Remember what I said, when you understand that you can never understand everything there is to understand, then you understand. Better to teach yourself and your children the principle of finding meaning, transforming the gashes of life. And as such, I have also included a booklet of 4 famous metaphorical stories that you can go through with your children. I will just quickly give you one fast one so you get a taste of what I'm talking about. But in the Gulag in Russia, a man was sent to 14 years in solitary confinement in a prison cell, and he was mortified. And when he got there, the jailer who was standing there said to him, well, this is where you're going to be, in solitary. And the man said to him, surely there is something for me to do. And the jailer, I guess, took pity on him and pointed at a wheel on the wall and said to him, that wheel, if you turn it, it irrigates plants and vegetables that are growing outside the prison. You could do that. And for the next 14 years, this man, and the story is true, turned that wheel sometimes 18 hours a day. He had purposeful, meaningful work. And because of that, he could endure it. And as Nietzsche says, where there is a why, we can endure any how. The why was there. I will turn that wheel because I am providing for everyone else in here. When he got out of jail 14 years later, the jailer took him aside and he said, can you show me the garden that I've irrigated? And the jailer burst into cackling laughter. That wheel was attached to nothing, he said. And the man dropped dead on his spot. Because Nietzsche was right. We who have a purpose and meaning, and that's the Jewish way, we can endure anyhow. It can be horrible. It can be frustrating. There can be a lot of screaming and yelling, and we're going to do our best to give you techniques and tips to create shalom in your home, peace in your home. But let's face it, things are going to be difficult. The Jewish response to pain and suffering, my friends, is to find purpose and meaning, not the meaning or the purpose of why this is happening. No, the meaning and the purpose that you have when you make yourself a giver. You know, there's a meme going around on Facebook. Mr. Rogers said that when he used to watch terrible things on the news, his mother would always say to him, watch out for the helpers. Look for the helpers. There are always helpers, always helpers. We also learned that this is a fundamental principle, not just from what happened at the beginning of time. That's the reason the Jewish day starts at night, because first it's dark and then it becomes light. It's the reason that the most painful and darkest time of pregnancy is 10 centimeters and dilated and pushing. And yet you're just moments before the birth of that miracle. It's going to come. The darkest moment of the night is one moment before dawn. That's why in our morning prayers, we talk about the rooster having chokhmah, wisdom. Why does the rooster have wisdom? Because the rooster crows, cock-a-doodle-doo, a minute before the sun comes up. It knows the sun is going to rise. And this is the reason that Jewish women through the history of our peoplehood moved through life knowing that dawn would come, that we would sing. Your job as a Jewish woman today is to grab your tambourine and try and figure out how to show those around you that we're in it to give it. How are your children, how are you going to respond to the quarantined elderly, to the lonely, to the disenfranchised? Because let's face it, my friends, there are many ways to be quarantined. There are people whose lives feel like emotional quarantine. The widow among you, the divorcee who has nobody calling her anymore, the person down the street who lives alone, the elderly, all of those people. This is your time. That's how you're going to turn the wheel in this cell. You're going to turn the wheel by giving. You know, Sarah Rigler said, the Talmud says that when one suffers, one should scrutinize one's deeds, implying that when you hear about disaster, and we are hearing about disaster, the first thing a Jew is meant to do is to ask themselves, what can I become? And remember, resilience is not overcoming, it is becoming. What can I become? How can I work on my character, on my midot, my character traits, my anger, my rage, my frustration, my jealousies, all of those character traits that break apart what could be a peaceful world? How can I work on them? This is the time to be doing it. You can do it with your children. And one of the things we're doing for you, Momentum, is that every day we are going to be giving you content that will help you feel less powerless, because the answer to what do Jews do in times of suffering and difficulty is we do personal tshuva. We become better people. This is not to say that you don't donate to causes. You do. Some things, though, are really a problem. When you throw money at them and it doesn't help, that's a problem. How are you going to reach out to your elderly relatives? How are you going to find out who within your community needs to be called, needs to be FaceTime, needs something? And your children can do the same. Your children are more than ready to step up. In fact, children often can show us that unself-conscious way of reaching out and touching someone. This is what we want to do. I want to read you something. Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel said of Adam and Eve, he said, "It's a fine thing to begin, but it is a much greater thing to begin again after what you worked for has been taken from you." The very beginning of our Torah tells us that we are in, and we were born into, Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve were born into a garden of earthly delights, that everything we needed was there. And then, of course, we blew it and we were sent out of the garden. And then, as Joni Mitchell so famously said in her beautiful song, Woodstock, she said, "We are stardust, we are golden, and we're trying to make our way back to the garden." This is the metaphor of life, my friends, that everything is wonderful, and then somehow we are expelled from the delusion we have of control, and we want to make our way back into that garden. We will, as a world, make our way back. There is no question about that. The question is, what will you do in this time? How will you sanctify life? Be a Kiddush HaChaim. How will you work on who you are? How will you create a story for your children so that one day they will turn around and say, "My mother taught me during a time of such profound difficulty that we don't need to worry, that we are not running the world, that we're not God, but that what we are in charge of is how we become who we will become." And there are all kinds of ways to do that. Art projects, music projects, even sports games can be connected to character. They're easy to do, and we will be sending things like that out to you. But in essence, as a person who has a clinical condition, which makes me have intrusive thoughts that make me think that if I hit a bump in the road, I might have run someone over, and make me want to run around the corner 10 times to see if something's there. All of those brain cramps that I've worked on my whole life, I have to tell you, this is manageable. This is manageable by becoming, not overcoming. I will stop for one moment in case there are any questions. Is there anything that anyone would like to ask in our last few minutes before I close this up? Judy, I'll leave that to you, and you can perhaps ask the question for me.
Okay, so we've got a couple questions.
Okay.
The first question is, how do you try to stop the panic in others? Because it's all over the media and social media. And this person wrote, that they think that the media is so in control of everyone's panic and anxiety levels. How do we help them reduce their anxiety? Let's start with that one.
It's a wonderful question. It's a spectacular question. Whoever asked it, thank you very much. In last week's Parsha and this week's Parsha, we learn about the golden calf. If you recall, Moses went up the mountain and came down with 2 stone tablets. Those 2 stone tablets had engraved by God the commandments, the covenant between the Jewish people as a nation, who we were going to be. And because they thought he was late coming down, they panicked. Nothing good happens from panic in our Torah. And he smashed those tablets because he could see that the world was not ready or capable of keeping those enjoyments. He went back up the mountain and came back on Yom Kippur Day and brought a second set of tablets, a set of tablets forged by Moshe in partnership with God and the people. In other words, things break and they are repaired. But the place of brokenness, as Leonard Cohen says, is the place where the light gets in. You feel anxiety? Okay. Sit with your anxiety for a little and then speak it out. Talk about it and then get busy. Become proactive in making a difference in other people's lives. And you should know that those shattered tablets, Moshe, they picked them up. And when they put them in the Mishkan, in the inner sanctuary of the ark we traveled with, he put in both the broken tablets, all of those shards, and the whole ones that came down on Yom Kippur. Why? Because in the sanctuary of your heart, you will have to be broken and whole at the same time. Things can be broken and whole. Do not worry that you are afraid. Do not fear your anxiety. It is part of the human condition. But rather than worrying about alleviating your anxiety, turn yourself to the attention of alleviating someone else's. It is the only thing that is a guaranteed short-term salve for our aching hearts. Judy?
Any special prayers you can suggest besides Tehillim?
Yes. I was ending with this, so thank you for the setup. So I said to you earlier, the serenity prayer from the 12-step program is, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. There is a phrase, an exquisite phrase, that we use as a meditation, we Jews. It says, Ein od milvado. It means all is God. Everything is God. Ein od milvado. I use that as a meditation and a medication. When I get super anxious, I will sit, and I used to do this with my children, and hold their hands when they were small and say, Ein od milvado. Everything is God. And if everything is God, know this. That means you don't have to be. Your children don't have to be. If there was ever a time to instill in them a love of a higher power, a power greater than themselves, even if you can't define it in traditional terms, but to understand there is a power higher than yourself, and we as humans are not enjoined to be that power. We are enjoined to be goodness, to help others. Your kids can be writing letters to elderly people that you can send out, drawing pictures that you can text to the elderly. There's a gazillion things that they can be doing, but for several hours a day, find a way for your children and you to go outside of your own anxiety and to worry instead for others, because the chances are most of us are not going to get this disease. Not in our demographic. Our job as Jews is to worry about those who might.